Ethan never remembered a lullaby, a warm kitchen, or the sound of someone calling his name with love. His earliest memories were painted in shades of grey, cold floors of the orphanage, the echo of footsteps in long hallways, and the quiet understanding that no one was coming for him. St. Andrew's Home for Children sat on the edge of a small American town, far enough to be forgotten, close enough to pretend it cared. To outsiders, it looked charming, a white building with blue shutters and a playground out front, but inside, it was a place where time moved slowly and hope aged faster than the children. Ethan learned early how to survive in silence. He didn't cry when other kids were adopted. He didn't ask questions about his past. And he never, ever let anyone see how deeply he wanted what the others had: a family. Mrs. Carter, the head caretaker, used to say he was an easy child. But in truth, Ethan had simply mastered the art of needing nothing. Or at least, pretending to. Every child in the orphanage had a file. A thin folder that supposedly held the truth of where they came from. Ethan had seen glimpses of others' birth dates, hospital names, sometimes even pictures of parents. But his file was different. Locked, restricted, off limits. The first time he asked about it, Mrs. Carter's smile tightened just enough to make him understand. Some doors were not meant to be opened. Years passed, and Ethan grew not just in age, but in awareness. He noticed things others didn't, the way certain staff members would lower their voices when he entered the room. The way visitors sometimes stared at him longer than necessary, whispering among themselves before quickly leaving. Once, when he was 13, a man in a black coat came asking specifically for him. They spoke in private, and when Ethan asked afterward what it was about, Mrs. Carter simply said, "A mistake," and changed the subject. But it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a thread, one that, if pulled, might unravel everything. By the time he turned 17, Ethan had stopped waiting for adoption. He had different plans now. He worked part-time at a small grocery store in town, saving every dollar he could. Not for college, not for a car, but for answers. There was a restlessness inside him, a quiet but persistent voice that refused to be ignored. It told him that his life didn't begin at the orphanage. It told him there was something missing, something important. One night, long after the lights were out and the building had settled into silence, Ethan made a decision. He had watched Mrs. Carter enough to know where she kept the keys. His heart pounded as he crept through the hallway, every creak of the floor sounding like a warning. The office door stood before him like a challenge. For a moment, he hesitated. Not because he was afraid of getting caught, but because he was afraid of what he might find. Still, he unlocked the door. Inside, the air felt heavier, as if it carried secrets too long buried. Ethan moved quickly, scanning the rows of filing cabinets until he found the one marked confidential. His hands trembled as he searched through the folders, each one a life story reduced to paper. And then he saw it. Ethan Cole. The folder was thicker than the others. That alone sent a chill down his spine. He opened it carefully, as though it might explode with truth. The first page was a birth certificate, but it wasn't like the others he had seen. The names of the parents were blacked out, completely erased. Not faded, not smudged. Intentionally removed. Why would someone do that? He whispered to himself. He flipped to the next page. Medical records? Normal. Nothing unusual. Then came a photograph, a small, slightly crumpled image of a baby wrapped in a blanket. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Keep him safe. They're watching." Ethan's breath caught. "They're watching," he repeated, his mind racing. Suddenly, the quiet of the room felt different. not peaceable menace. He glanced toward the door, half expecting someone to be standing there, but the hallway remained empty. He kept reading. There were documents that didn't make sense, official letters with logos he didn't recognize, sections redacted so heavily that only fragments of sentences remained. Words like transfer, classified, and unauthorized access jumped out at him, forming a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. Then, near the back of the file, he found something that made his blood run cold. A newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Prominent couple dies in mysterious fire, no survivors found." Beneath it was a photo of a house engulfed in flames. And standing in front of that house, smiling in a separate picture, was a man and a woman, well-dressed, powerful-looking, and strangely familiar. Ethan stared at their faces, a strange sense of recognition tugging at him. They look like... He paused, unable to finish the thought. At the bottom of the article, a single line had been circled in red ink. Authorities confirm no child was present at the scene, despite earlier reports. Ethan's heart began to race uncontrollably. No child, but earlier reports said there was one. His mind connected the pieces before he could stop it. The blacked out names, the warning note, the mysterious visitors, and now this. What if? His voice trembled. What if that child was me? A sudden noise echoed from the hallway. Footsteps. Ethan froze. They were slow, deliberate, getting closer. He snapped the file shut, his pulse hammering in his ears. The doorknob began to turn, and in that moment, one terrifying realization hit him harder than anything else. Someone knew he was here. The doorknob twisted slowly, each second stretching like it might snap under the weight of Ethan's fear. And in that fragile moment between being discovered and escaping, something inside him shifted. Not panic, but clarity, a sharp instinct that told him this was no longer about curiosity, it was about survival. So, instead of freezing, he moved. He grabbed the file, shoved it under his jacket, and slipped behind the tall cabinet just as the door creaked open. The dim hallway lights spilling into the office and cutting shadows across the floor like silent warnings. And then he saw her, Mrs. Carter, standing in the doorway, her silhouette still and composed. But something about her presence felt different tonight, heavier, like she had been expecting this moment all along. She didn't call out his name, didn't switch on the lights. She simply stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and stood there in the quiet, listening, as if she knew he was somewhere in the room. And Ethan held his breath so tightly it burned in his chest, every muscle locked, every thought screaming to run, but his body refused to make a sound. Seconds passed, then a minute, and finally she spoke, her voice low and calm. "You were never supposed to find that." And the words didn't feel like anger, they felt like resignation, like the end of something that had been inevitable from the start. And when she turned and left without another word, closing the door softly behind her, Ethan didn't wait to question it. He moved, fast and silent, slipping out of the office, down the hallway, out the back exit, and into the cold night air where his heart finally allowed itself to explode into motion. He ran until the orphanage was nothing more than a distant shape behind him, until his lungs burned and his legs trembled, until the only sound left was his own breath and the echo of those words, "You were never supposed to find that," looping endlessly in his mind. By morning, Ethan was gone. Not just from the orphanage, but from the life he had known, carrying with him nothing but a backpack, a few saved dollars, and the file that now felt less like paper and more like a ticking truth, waiting to detonate. He found a cheap motel on the edge of the nearest city, the kind of place where no one asked questions, and locked himself inside. spreading the documents across the bed like pieces of a puzzle he was desperate to solve, and for hours he studied every detail, every redacted line, every strange symbol and unfamiliar logo, until one thing began to stand out, a recurring name, hidden in fragments, barely visible beneath black ink, but consistent enough to recognize: Helix Foundation. It appeared in letters, in authorization stamps, even in the corner of the newspaper clipping, and whatever it was connected to him, to the fire, to everything. The internet became his ally, and after days of searching through archived pages, obscure forums, and buried records, Ethan uncovered something unsettling. The Helix Foundation didn't officially exist. There were no public records, no corporate listings, nothing that tied it to any legal entity. And yet there were whispers, scattered across conspiracy threads and investigative blogs, all pointing to the same idea: a private organization involved in classified research, powerful enough to erase itself from existence. Most dismissed it as fiction, but Ethan knew better. Because fiction doesn't black out birth certificates or send men in black coats to orphanages. Then he found it a single address, mentioned in an old, half-deleted post, a facility located miles outside the city, hidden behind the front of a defunct medical research center. It was the first real lead he had, and despite every instinct warning him to stay away, he knew there was no turning back, because whatever truth waited for him there had already shaped his entire life. The building stood abandoned, its windows dark, its walls worn by time, but the security cameras still moved, subtle and deliberate, confirming what he already suspected: this place wasn't dead, it was hiding. Ethan waited until nightfall, watching from a distance, studying the patterns, the blind spots, the rhythm of whatever unseen system guarded the facility. And when the moment came, he slipped inside through a broken side entrance, his pulse steady but loud in his ears, each step deeper into the building, feeling like a step further away from the person he used to be. Inside, the air was cold and sterile, the faint hum of electricity echoing through the corridors. And as he moved through the shadows, he began to see its signs that this place was still active: doors requiring keycards, rooms filled with equipment far too advanced to belong in an abandoned building. And then, at the end of a long hallway, he found a room that made everything else feel small. A control center, screens flickering with data, files, and live camera feeds. And at the center of it all, a single terminal left unlocked, as if waiting for him. Ethan approached slowly, his reflection staring back at him from the dark screen, before it flickered to life. And what he saw next stopped his heart. A file, labeled with his name. Subject: Ethan Cole. His hands trembled as he opened it, the truth unfolding line by line in a way that no imagination could have prepared him for. He wasn't just an orphan. He wasn't just a survivor of some tragic fire. He was the result of an experiment. Part of a classified program designed to study genetic potential, cognitive adaptation, and something far more disturbing: controlled human evolution. His parents, the ones from the newspaper, hadn't died by accident. They had been scientists leading the project. And when they tried to shut it down, to expose it, the fire had been their punishment. But Ethan had been their greatest success. And their greatest mistake. Subject exhibits accelerated learning, heightened perception, and adaptive behavioral patterns beyond normal human thresholds. The words blurred as his mind struggled to keep up. I'm an experiment, he whispered, the realization cutting deeper than anything he had felt before. But it wasn't the last line that shattered him, it was the one beneath it. Monitoring active. Subject unaware of full capabilities. A sudden sound behind him made him turn sharply. Footsteps, not one person, several, and then a voice. Calm, controlled, and far too familiar. I was wondering how long it would take you to find us. Mrs. Carter stepped into the room, no longer the gentle caretaker he had known, but something else entirely, someone who belonged here. Someone who had been watching him all along. You. You knew? Ethan's voice shook, anger rising through the confusion. I was assigned to you, she replied simply. From the beginning. Assigned, he repeated, disbelief turning into fury. You lied to me my whole life? No, she said, her expression unreadable. I protected you. By hiding the truth. By keeping you alive, she corrected, and for a moment, something almost human flickered in her eyes, something that made Ethan hesitate. The guards behind her stepped forward slightly, their presence a silent threat. You weren't supposed to come here yet, she continued. You weren't ready. Ready for what? He demanded, her gaze locked onto his, steady and unyielding. For what you are. The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of her words settling between them. And Ethan felt it then, not fear, not confusion, but something else, something deeper, like a door inside him beginning to open, something he had never noticed. Before, but had always been there, waiting. Come with us, she said softly. Or keep running and spend the rest of your life being hunted for something you don't even understand. Ethan looked at her, then at the guards, then back at the screen that held the truth of his existence, and in that moment, he realized something terrifying wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a choice, and whatever he chose would decide what he becomes.